buangan ikan keli Afrika di Sungai Tanjung Ayu. Do you know about it?
Oh yeah, I know. It's just normal. What is the deal about it?
Normal? Oh my god, do you know that ikan keli Africa is a non-native species that have colonized the new area to the point of damaging the surrounding environment and can cause threat to our ecosystem. Let me show you.
Imagine a world where foreign intruders threaten the very fabric of our natural landscapes, where ecosystems, once in balance, now teeter on the brink of collapse. Today, we delve into the pervasive issue of invasive species, a global challenge with far-reaching implications for biodiversity, economies, and human health. Malaysia re-owned its diverse ecosystem and rich biodiversity, facing growing challenges from invasive species. These non-native organisms, introduced either accidentally or intentionally, have established themselves in Malaysian habitats, posing threats to native flora, fauna, and ecosystems. This video delves into some of the prominent invasive species in Malaysia, examining their impacts and management strategies. Invasive species, often introduced unintentionally through human activities, possess the remarkable ability to outcome the native flora and fauna, disrupting delicate ecological relationships established over the millennia.
My name is Siva Pragasam. I've been working in KEBI for the last 6+ years. I started off as a senior scientist, and currently I am the regional director for the KEBI Southeast Asia Center. An alien species is one that comes from another country. It is not indigenous to that particular country. And when alien species come into a new country, a new environment, they become also invasive simply because there is no mitigating element which will reduce its impact in the new environment. Therefore, you find that they can also spread very easily. Because of globalization, people moving around, travel is cheap, there are increased pathways. Previously, we can sort of manage the pathways. We know people are either traveling by air or people are traveling by water or by land. But now with all these things being enhanced, so people can bring in a lot of things inside. So it becomes increasingly of concern to national authorities in trying to mitigate this problem.
Peacock bass, as an invasive species introduced outside its native Amazonia habitat in countries like Malaysia, have profoundly impacted local freshwater ecosystems. Known for their aggressive predatory behavior and rapid population growth, peacock bass compete with native fish species for food and habitat, which leads to decline in native biodiversity. Their introduction has disrupted natural food webs and altered ecosystem dynamics, threatening the stability and resilience for aquatic ecosystems. Efforts to manage invasive peacock bass population involves regulating recreational fish practices, implementing monitoring programs to track their spread, and raising public awareness about the ecological consequences of invasive species introduction. Red-eared slider turtle. Originating from the North America, red-eared slider turtle have become invasive in Malaysian water bodies, often released by pet owners. These turtles compete with native species for food and basking sites, potentially disrupting local ecosystems. Their presence highlights the need for responsible pet ownership practices and educational campaigns to prevent further introductions and manage existing population. African catfish. Popular in aquaculture, African catfish has established wild population in Malaysian rivers and lakes. While economically valuable, they pose ecological threats by competing with native fish for resources and altering aquatic habitats through their feeding behaviors. Management approaches including regulating aquaculture practices, monitoring wild populations, and promoting sustainable fishing practices to minimize ecological impacts. plecotomus, which is also known as the ikan bandaraya. Originating from South America, the plecotomus are also known as the sucker-mouth catfish, entered Malaysian waters primarily through the aquarium trade. Recognized for its armed body and algae-eating habits, this fish has spread wildly in freshwater environments. While beneficial in aquariums for algae control, plecotomus alters natural ecosystems by competing with native fish for food and habitat. Its presence can disrupt local food webs and ecosystem balance, necessitating management efforts such as regulating the aquarium trade and implementing removal programs where established. One of the primary pathways for the introduction of invasive species into Malaysia is through global trade and travel. Malaysia's strategic geographical location and robust international trade connections facilitate the unintentional movement of species across borders. Cargo ships, airplanes, and vehicles transport goods and materials that can harbor invasive species as stowaways or contaminants.
The project has many components, and we have to look at number one, the policy angle, the national instruments, in trying to link up invasive species into the National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan. Because there was very little mention of invasive species in the National Strategic, the Biodiversity Strategic Plan. So we need to put in that. So that was one of the targets which we did. And then a whole range of other things like developing pest risk modules, rapid response modules and so on. For some of the identified, we try to list the key invasive species. The top 10, for example, impacting upon forest ecosystem. And then you try to find out what are their risks in terms of establishment, in terms of their spread, in terms of their damage and impact. So you sort of do an analysis and sort of help them determine which will be the key invasive species that you should be worried about.
Rapid urbanization and habitat modification in Malaysia create new opportunities for invasive species to establish and spread. Urban areas and agricultural landscapes often experience habitat fragmentations, soil disturbance, and altered hydrological regimes, which can favor the establishment of invasive species adapted to disturbed environments. Construction activities, road networks, and changes in land can create corridors for invasive species to spread into new habitats, further their impacts on native biodiversity. Some invasive species were intentionally introduced into Malaysia for pest control or economic purposes. For an example, frogs were introduced to control agriculture pests, but their population expanded beyond control, leading to adverse impacts on native species through predation and disease transmission. Similarly, biological control agents introduced to manage invasive species can sometimes become invasive themselves if they are not thoroughly researched and monitored.
Let us say when we started, it was sort of bottoms down, in terms of very little understanding. Now we have sort of stepped up at least to 60-70% of understanding. I think people understand when you talk to them about invasive alien species. They are aware of it, they are aware of what can be done, they are aware of what can be used for management. And so they have built up that skills. The project has sort of contributed in that sense. We have given tools for countries to manage. Now the countries have to take out those tools and apply them in their local context. Okay, we have trained the people, we have given them the skills, we have given them the framework, we have given all these things. So now what the country needs to do is, if they are approached with this problem, or they encounter this problem, now let us see how they could use that box of tools, take it out and say, okay, I can apply this now for this, I can apply this for this. And I've got people here who can advise me on these things.
In conclusion, the presence of invasive species in Malaysia is primarily driven by human activities such as global trade and travel, aquaculture and agriculture practices, the pet trade, urbanization, climate change, and intentional introduction for pest control or economic gain. Addressing the challenge of invasive species requires integrated management approaches that includes the strengthening biosecurity measures, regulating trade and transport, promoting responsible pet ownership, restoring and protecting native habitats, and monitoring the impacts of introduced species on native biodiversity and ecosystems. By understanding and addressing the root causes of invasive species introductions, Malaysia can better preserve its unique biodiversity, protect its ecosystems, and promote sustainable development for future generations.